Okay. All right, so we're gonna do a case study on Mother Cabrini, St. Francis Xavier Cabrini. So at the core of this challenge are the values. And nowhere are the values more present than the lives of the church's saints. But sometimes when we think of the lives of saints, we can turn them into clean plastic statues or golden icons. But over the next 10 weeks, I want to peel back the curtain on several more recent holy leaders who started great Catholic apostolates. What was their recipe for success, if you can even call it that? We'll have a few case studies on these leaders. The next two, Dorothy Day and Mother Teresa of Calcutta, will be more traditional style case studies with audience participation in a smaller group setting. But given the tight schedule today, this will be a little bit more TED Talky style. So just came across this recently. Colorado just replaced Columbus Day with Cabrini Day. Now, this isn't a joke, but it's the first paid state holiday recognizing a woman in the US. So apparently I'm not the only fan of hers. The entire state of Colorado is becoming as well. I want to share with you some stats. Mother Cabrini, born 1850 in Italy, founded the Missionary Sisters of the Sacred Heart of Jesus, the first US citizen to be canonized, patron saint of immigrants. She founded 67 institutions in about 30 years, hospitals, schools, orphanages across 3 continents. That's an institute every 6 months, and these weren't small projects. At the time of her death, there were 1,500 sisters in her congregation. She crossed the ocean 27 times by boat. You can see a map of her travels and institutions here. This was made shortly after her death. It's a typical saint story. She did all these incredible things despite poor health. She's one of the great missionaries of recent times. Mother Teresa of Calcutta drew great inspiration from her life and work and modeled many of the missionaries of charity approaches after Mother Cabrini. You could say that she's the proto-American saint. Okay, clearly she's awesome. But before unpacking some of the key ingredients of her life, which I wanted to hear, I want to understand the context. Cardinal Ratzinger outlined what he saw as the 4 charismatic movements of church history. Basically, these are some of the ways that the church has renewed throughout history. Early on, there was the monastic period, think monks in cloister. In the Middle Ages, the mendicants, think Franciscan friars, the Dominicans. Then in the 1500s and beyond, the Jesuits, more active congregations. And Mother Cabrini is part of this movement. Cardinal Ratzinger, later Pope Benedict, says in the 19th century apostolic movement was characterized by a strong emphasis on charity, emphasis on caring for the suffering and the poor. So these are the congregations, a lot of them led by women, that built the Catholic schools in the United States, built hospitals in the late 1800s and early 1900s. So Mother Cabrini is very much part of this movement, in some ways an icon of it. So we understand her within that context as part of a broader movement in the church. And then we see what Cardinal Ratzinger points out, that some of the more recent movements in church history are often led by laity. I think of Opus Dei, Neo-Catechumenate Way, other more lay-led renewal efforts in the church in the past 100 years or so. But now back to Mother Cabrini, where did her vocation come from? And I want to share with you that now.
By the way, I've always wanted to ask you, where did your religious vocation come from? I mean, your fearless missionary vocation. My mother and father were people of great faith. And in Sant'Angelo Lodigiano, a small village in North Italy where I was born, there were many missionaries who left for faraway countries, aware they were going to risk their lives for the salvation of those souls. Every day, before the evening prayer, my father used to read us the Annals of Propagation of the Faith, a collection of letters and testimonies of bishops and priests from the missions of China, Burma, India, Africa, New Zealand, from all over the world. I especially remember when they wrote about Chinese newborn girls being killed in their cradles just because they were girls. In that moment, I decided in my heart that when I grew up, I would go as well. Yeah.
Okay, so you can see here that she always wanted to be a missionary since she was a child, had this burning desire to go to the East.
By the way,
but at the age of 20, so at the age of 20, she applied to a religious congregation. She was turned down for poor health. She then spent the next almost 10 years heading up an orphanage before starting her own religious congregation. But from the beginning, she was an entrepreneur. After starting the congregation in 1880 at the age of 30, she set up a school that would generate revenue to cover the cost of the orphanage. She started classes in needlework and sold embroidery to earn revenue. And they grew fast, 7 homes in 5 years. She then spent another 7 years in Italy with this congregation before seeking a missionary life. And I think this is interesting. So she'd wanted since a child to go to the East as a missionary, but didn't even ask permission to do that until late in her 30s, after 17 years of running orphanages and schools near her home in Italy. I don't know about you, but I see in this incredible patience and trust in God for his timing. She was a forceful woman, but also knew how to be patient. And this balance in the apostolic life between action and patience is never perfect, but requires discernment, because most of us have temperaments that lean one way or the other. We tend to force things a little bit too much, or maybe we kind of hold back. Mother Cabrini navigated this because she remained close to the flame. She stayed close to the Lord in prayer and her way of life, and this helped to clarify vision and discernment. Here's a quotation that she would often reference from St. Francis Xavier, the great Jesuit missionary to the East. She quoted it to her sisters and others. St. Francis Xavier said, "He who goes wholly to the missions will find many occasions to sanctify himself more. But he who goes with little holiness runs the risk of losing what he has and of falling away." And I think in here we hear Jesus's words from the Gospel of Matthew too. "For everyone who has, more shall be given, and he will have an abundance. But from the one who does not have, even what he does have shall be taken away." So what keeps her tethered to this flame, what keeps her close to the Lord, is this integration of holiness in her rule of life, I would argue. And this is a routine of life that harmonizes crucial elements to keep one close to God, the source of true life. Her congregation's rule was adapted from the Jesuits' rule. And you see this in pretty much all religious congregations throughout church history, and then also in more lay-led groups today, including Opus Dei. There's a rule or a plan of life to harmonize these different elements. And some of the key elements are sacramental life, emphasis on the Eucharist and confession on a regular basis, daily time for mental and liturgical prayer, regular work, community and family time, healthy recreation, and in all things, charity and virtues. And I would argue that it's living this rule of life every day, day in and day out, that gave her the endurance and the spiritual strength to labor for almost 30 years building charitable institutions around the world. So how does she begin? Well, she goes to Pope Leo XIII, no less, at the age of 37 and asks to be a missionary. She has to go to China, but he tells her not to the East, but to the West. He asks her to serve the poor Italian immigrants in the US because they were impoverished with little spiritual or human support from the church. She doesn't want to go, but she does it anyway. And this is an interesting pattern in Holy Catholic leaders throughout church history. What they end up doing is not what they want to do at the beginning. St. Francis of Assisi wanted to go to Jerusalem to preach to the infidels. Nope. He ended up staying in the unknown town of Assisi for pretty much the rest of his life. St. Ignatius of Loyola, the founder of the Jesuits, also wanted to go to Jerusalem. Nope. He ended up spending the rest of his life working out of a few rooms in Rome. And at the beginning, he didn't even think about starting universities. That ended up becoming one of the core charisms of the Jesuits, and they built some of the best universities the world had ever seen, and so on. And you see this in startups too. They start out on one road and then find product market fit or traction on some others. And perhaps you'll face this as well, and that's okay. It's happened to great saints and entrepreneurs, so you're in good company. Be open to opportunity and the surprising work of the Holy Spirit. So what happens next? Well, she arrives in New York. And when we think of New York now, we often think fancy clubs, nice restaurants, but this was not her experience. This was not the New York of Italian immigrants at the time. New York that she encountered looked more like this: an Italian man in his hovel in Manhattan, turn of the century. Or like this. Italian immigrants at the time would have as many as 20 families crammed into a few rooms, sharing one latrine. Work was hard. Immigrants had little organized schooling or healthcare. This was the world that she entered, and the need was tremendous. But within the first few months of this new continent, without speaking the language, she and her sisters had founded a school in an orphanage. And this was part of how they did it.
Good morning. I came yesterday to ask if there exists a directory listing all the businesses of Italian immigrants.
Yes. You're lucky, sister. Here you are.
God be praised.
So Mother Cabrini was known as an incredible fundraiser. In this scene, she acquires the list of Italian business owners to invite them to join her in their mission. Once, when a benefactor had promised her a donation in writing, she asked, and later asked to be released from the contract, she told him no, because it might be detrimental to his soul, and she made him pay up. Dorothy Day, the founder of the Catholic Worker Movement, said that she would read Mother Cabrini when she needed inspiration to go fundraise. But her fundraising was also guided by prayer and asking God and the Blessed Virgin Mary first. Once, when she needed funds for a project, she placed the amount under the statue of St. Anne in the chapel and held vigil. Sure enough, a man showed up just in time with the money that she needed. Her fundraising prowess was perhaps only matched by her business acumen.
Good morning.
Unfortunately, the hospital has declared bankruptcy. Father Morelli has repeatedly asked us for additional money, way more than the sum we had agreed, but he never paid the mortgage. Soon, the bank will come to take possession of the property and everything inside.
And our patients? Surely they won't want to take our sick patients. We will transfer the sickest to another hospital, and for the rest, we will rent a house and establish our own small hospital. The Lord hasn't called us to this mission to leave us in the shadow of someone else's failure. I give you a special assignment. In the journal, write that today our hospital is born, and we will dedicate it to Columbus.
Before they arrived to take possession, we were able to transfer the sickest patients to the public hospital. Without wasting time, our mother rented a house on 12th Avenue. She purchased 10 beds and linen, from which she made 20 bed sheets. Mother constantly reminded us not to take a single thing with us, but Dr. Villery gave the nurse a smaller writing desk and some surgical instruments, stating that he had handed over the money and purchased them for his personal use. A man gave us a horse and someone else a cart to transfer the sick. Finally, we also started a training course for nurses.
So here in this scene, the hospitals the sisters had assumed with lots of debts ended up going bankrupt, but she quickly executed a plan to care for the patients and refound the hospital. This became Columbus Hospital in Chicago, which became the dominant healthcare provider for that city for almost a century. You can see her great business and managerial acumen, as well as her willingness to improvise. Once when she was being cheated by contractors, she had the sisters go and measure all the dimensions of the site and found that it was not a spec. She followed up with the contractors and got it done right. And you see this in other great founders throughout church history. St. Teresa of Avila founded over 20 Carmelite monasteries by horseback in Spain. Mother Angelica had a similar temperament, built EWTN. You didn't mess with these women. And I think it shows that holiness, loving God, and authentic charity doesn't mean you let people walk all over you or you get a bad deal. But also not all of us are built like this. We have to know our temperaments. But you can be holy and get stuff done for the good of others. But at the end of the day, this must flow from a core intimacy with God and prayer, not pure activism where it can go off course. Another key aspect of Mother Cabrini's life was it wasn't about her. And I think this is a great key to her success. The number one virtue she emphasized with her daughters was humility. I've listed just some of her stakeholders here in her work, and we could probably write up many others. But she would pray regularly for her benefactors, volunteers, and other stakeholders. And this is extremely important because there can be a great temptation in building something to see benefactor X, client Y, or customers, or those that we serve, as a means to accomplish what I want, or I think God wants. But then we devalue the dignity of that person, and we can treat them as an object. That benefactor, investor, client is a child of God and becomes part of our family and our team. Trust me, they'll want to be part of your mission a whole lot more if they see your sincerity and your love for them. I mean, it's a great soundbite. Look at her. She built 67 institutes, 30 years. But also, as soon as we start counting my successes, my institutes built, money raised, followers, etc., we have to be careful. We're building God's kingdom or our own. And the same goes on the other side. If things don't work out, we can't get down on it. God's not in this. Authentic humility involves surrendering the success or failure to Him because it's His work anyway, not ours. His measure of success or failure can be totally different from what we see now. God wants love, Christ-like love. So our work, our projects are only a vehicle of this love in pursuit of His kingdom, His glory, and His saints. So Mother Cabrini was a woman of incredible prayer and trust in God, and you can almost see it on her face here. Once when she saw a sister with a furrowed brow, she reprimanded her not to worry, saying, I have 50 institutes to run, but I don't worry about a thing. Why should you? Her prioritization of prayer kept her serene even in difficult situations. She died in 1917 while making candy for kids for Christmas, and I think it's a fitting way to die. She was a great businesswoman, yes, but she also took time to make candy for kids. And there's a great lesson in this for us too. So Mother Cabrini is without a doubt a great model in many ways for us, but I think we also have to recognize some of the differences. And I think this goes back to Ratzinger's charismatic movements throughout church history, and that every wave of renewal in the church has some different characteristics. Benedictine monks lived differently than Mother Cabrini's sisters, even though they both wore black. And there's a key distinction between the former movements and those of today that are much more often led by laity. Many of you have or will have families, and I'm pretty sure no one here has made a vow of poverty, although I could be wrong in that. But this was not the case before. And I would argue that there's a lot of similarity here with other religious congregations in that most congregations throughout church history have put an emphasis on community, think family life. But having a spouse and raising kids does change the game a little bit. So while we can look to Mother Cabrini as a model in many ways, I think it's also important that we do recognize some of the differences. So in conclusion, I'd just like to point to some questions. Probably you have other questions that you may ask yourself that emerge from you from this exercise or Anthony's or others, but some that come to mind. So getting centered, what is your rule of life? And daring to grow How do you integrate business tenacity with a deep spiritual core? Carrying the torch. Who are your stakeholders? And how will you reverence their dignity? I hope Mother Cabrini becomes a friend and an intercessor for you in this journey, as you too become an inspired pioneer, leaving a legacy for Christ. Mother Cabrini, pray for us. Okay, well, we sprinted through that presentation as well, but we're gonna transition now to we have Father Donald Planty with us with the Diocese of Arlington, who's going to offer a little presentation. I'm going to introduce him briefly, and then after he talks, we'll have a break in the afternoon. Father Planty, welcome. He's a pastor of St. Charles Borromeo Church in Arlington, Virginia, where he's been since 2014. A former chaplain of Christendom College. He's held assignments in Africa for the Holy See, and his parish is one of the largest millennial attended parishes in the country, and he's had a deep focus on spiritual formation for young professionals there. And he's going to be discussing with us setting goals for personal and spiritual growth in preparation for the end of for the rest of our afternoon. So Father Planty, thank you. Welcome for being with us today.
Thanks for having me. Why don't I suggest for just 1 second, everyone take a stretch break, maybe stand up and stretch.